everyone. This Canons here. Basil, Patrick, and Reuben, as per usual.
Hello.
We'll be discussing 2011's Margaret, starring a bunch of people. Anna Paquin.
Yes.
Jean Reno. Matt Damon. Matthew Broderick. I don't know the name of the actress who plays Anna Paquin's mom.
I don't know either.
Honestly, I cannot remember.
Or Alice, but a lot of good people.
Monica was also. There's a whole bunch of people that I recognize.
I was going to say
Monica.
Monica is Alice and Janney.
It's Alice and Janney. Yeah, from the West
Janney?
Wing.
Is it Janney?
I think it's Janney.
Yeah, I definitely Janney. I definitely recognized her.
And it's directed by Kenneth Lonergan. I haven't checked his IMDb, but if I'm correct, I believe he's only directed 3 films. This, You Can Count on Me, and The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. So one of these things is not like the other.
Apparently, this was, I think they were making this movie in like 2005, and
yeah, I was going to say
Kenneth Lonergan had like a 5-hour cut of the movie that he wanted to release, and they were like, no, you can't do that. So he cut it down to like 2.5 hours, but it took him like 6 years to get it cut and released.
This was shot in 2005?
Yeah, I was going to say, when you said 2011, yeah. I was going to make a joke that also known as 2005's Margaret, because
that makes the Anna Paquin casting as a high school student a lot more logical. But
yes,
she's still,
it also makes
in the scenes when they have actual high school students acting as extras, she still looks a lot older than them. How much older than a high school student would she have been in 2005? 3 years?
She was in her mid 20s, I think, because she's 31 now, so she would be in her mid 20s.
22.
No, if she's 31 now in 2005.
That's 8 years ago.
Oh yeah. 22. Okay, yeah.
23.
So early 20s, yeah. But I was gonna say there is some very outdated technology in this too. Like you see somebody playing a GameCube at one point, and I was like, clearly. And then she says, I know they say something about the current president, and I was like, I don't think that they're talking about Obama. I think they're talking about Bush at that point too, because like knowing that about the film going into it, I was like, okay, all the stuff they're talking about, like arguing about, makes sense, because a lot of it is like,
I mean, it's still surprisingly on point in a way. But I guess before we really get into, we've gotten off topic just by discussing who was in it, who directed it, and what year it was released. But I think we should start off as we usually do with sort of everyone giving their thumbs up, thumbs down, yes, no, be as specific as you want, what they felt in a general way about it.
I love this movie. I was surprised how much I liked it.
This movie stressed me out quite a bit.
And I mean, were you okay with it, or was it bad?
It kept oscillating for me, honestly, like wildly. So it was be like one scene, I was like, okay, yeah, I get what's going on here, and then the next scene I'd be like, no. It was like
but
back
again,
and forth
so
like that.
Were these emotions like, were you okay with them? Like, at the end of the movie, were you like, I approve of the way that it did this to me? Or were you like, I didn't?
Honestly, having seen it through to fruition, I'm like, okay, yeah, the director definitely knew what he was going for here. So I liked it, but I don't know. There were certain points in the movies where my emotions were just like, no, I don't want to watch this. I don't want to watch this, because I guess it was just the portrayal of Anna Paquin's character, like, just kept stressing me out so much. Like, I don't know, it's the way the one character describes her is like being the center of an opera.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking this is just because I didn't feel dissimilarly to you, but I strongly liked that quality of the film. So that's why I'm asking, did you like or dislike it? The fact that happened. Like, I liked it, but I stressed me out too.
That much.
I'm sorry?
I was going to say, I liked it, but I don't think I liked it as much as you guys liked it.
Yeah. I actually, you probably haven't checked, but on Letterboxd, I moved it to the top of my movies from the 2010s list. So this is my favorite movie that I've seen released from the last 4 years.
I would probably call it pretty close to that, too, for me. I'm not sure what else I've seen in that time period off the top of my head, but
I'd be really interested in seeing the 5-hour original cut, actually. I'm not normally interested in seeing a 5-hour movie, but this movie never felt slow or protracted to me, and it definitely felt like there was more stuff going on that he could have gone into. There was like, at the end of the movie, I wasn't like, oh, I know everything that's happened in this story and with these characters and this situation. I definitely, could have kept learning about them.
Although I agree with that. Although I would probably watch a 5-hour cut of this movie for sure. But in as much as I've ever watched a 5-hour anything in one sitting.
5 hours sounds impressive. But based off the 2.5-hour trailer, I'm impressed enough to keep watching.
But I was gonna say, in some ways, I liked this sort of unfinished quality where a lot of scenes didn't exactly add up the way they normally would in a movie, where like if there's some kind of rule in a lot of screenwriting that each scene should contribute to the overall narrative and also be kind of its own mini narrative, and that I felt like a lot of the scenes just ended in odd places, but odd places that I enjoyed seeing them end, like got enough done.
Well, Kenneth Lonergan's background is actually as a playwright, and while I think maybe that background held him back a little bit, and You Can Count on Me, I think he used it to his advantage here for the exact reason you say, is that there's sort of all these little scenes are really worked out really well as their own individual scenes. And I think almost any of them, if you were to just take it out of the movie and stand alone and be like, here's a scene from a movie, it would stand on its own, like dramatically, and be interesting, and you would be like, this is interesting, but it also wouldn't necessarily have everything else that the film is supposed to have in it in that scene. They're separate, they're unified by their existence in the film together, and obviously there is an overarching storyline in the film, but it does work more in a way that a play usually does, with like these, capsules.
I also like that people kept interrupting each other to be like, what are you talking about? I feel like that's something you almost never see in a movie, where someone's like, why are you telling me this? Like, it's just like like it happens all the time in real life when people are arguing with each other, but usually movie arguments end up being like each person is saying a piece of their point and they're kind of like alternating having their point, and there's never a point where like things get so derailed that one character has to go, what are you even saying right now?
Honestly, well, I was going to say that was, I think those were the scenes that really stressed me out. The ones where people would keep interrupting each other to shout, more things at the other person. And I was just like, oh, this is like watching people like fight in real life. You're just like uncomfortable and you're like, oh, I'm embarrassed to like sit there and be like, oh my God, I can't believe that they're that, far unhinged that they will, have this fight in public like that, like that their emotions are running that high. But now that I think about it, it's a feat to get, to accomplish that on film, to portray that as opposed to it actually happening, because it feels totally natural within the film. I think what I was reacting to was my own social mores, or I was just like, oh God, no. And I think it is impressive that they were able to recreate
your monocle fell in your champagne glass.
I was like, ooh.
I don't know exactly what to say, because I feel like emotions running high, like they came unhinged, it is not how I want to describe it. Like organic and natural, yes, I think that's true. But there was something, I think about the fighting that didn't feel unhinged to me. Like what Basil was saying is that normally, and I agree with him, movie fighting seems very like staged, and it's like about having some sort of philosophical argument or something, and then this was really just sort of people being people. And I didn't think anyone in the film was crazy. And again, that's another one of the things that I like about the movie, is that like I would constantly be like, that's kind of a good point, that's kind of a good point, that's also kind of a good point. And like, everything made sense emotionally. everything came from, you know, whenever someone like got really upset about something, I was like, oh yeah, you probably should have gotten upset about that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean, and I feel like, yeah, looking back on it, I can see that is, you know, kind of what was going down in all those scenes, because yeah, there's no point where somebody gets mad just to drive the plot forward. It's really all, it's not about the plot so much as it is like these characters interacting, you know, pretty realistically, and
I think part of that, by the way, is the acting, which I thought was phenomenal from front to back. Like, other than sort of Anna Paquin looking out of place whenever she was in school, you know, I would forget about it when she wasn't like in the classroom. You know, like when she was in the classroom, she was literally like 5 inches taller than like some of the people. Like, you know, she was like completely fully developed in her face, and like, you know, like little kids. And but other than that, you know, I mean, she was great. You know, she looked out of place a little bit, but I sort of forgot about it, especially over the course of the movie, as there were less high school scenes. And I just thought, you know, everyone was wonderful. Even people who I don't normally enjoy, like Matthew Broderick, were really good.
Matthew Broderick had a pretty understated part, but I felt really bad for his character. His character was really kind of, I guess like a doormat kind of, but he's not really like, it wasn't like people were walking all over him. He just, you know, like didn't know how to handle any of those situations that he was in. He was just this character who was like, I'm too meek to do anything about what's happening to me. I don't know. I think it worked, though. I think
this is starting to get into sort of like some of the themes of the film, so we can start talking about that, because it wasn't for me like, okay, so one of the major themes of the film is sort of like an inability to respond to things, I guess, or, you know, to know how to respond to things. So the story of the film is there's a young girl played by Anna Paquin living in New York City. She's looking for a cowboy hat for a party, and she sees a bus driver wearing a cowboy hat, and she tries to flag him down to get his attention and ask where he got the cowboy hat. And he, I guess, sees it as sort of flirty. That's up to interpretation. But anyways, he's looking at her, you know, having an interaction with her, runs a red light, and runs over Allison Janney, who, for a fairly decent name, is in the film for maybe 3 minutes total.
Yeah, she has a very big scene.
Yeah, and she dies from this bus accident, and then
she dies in the arms of Anna Paquin's character. We should mention that. Yeah, Anna Paquin's character is right there with her as she's dying,
and we can discuss what works in that scene, because I do think it's one of the best scenes in the film later. But then, so Anna Paquin initially lies to the policeman and says that the light was not, that it was green. And then over the course of the film, she decides that she wants to amend her statement and becomes invested in the idea of making the bus driver have fault, take responsibility for his actions and this woman's death. So that is the central plot, and then all the sort of mini plots sort of revolve around this. I guess the idea of justice as like a big concept, but even just in a smaller way, events having conclusions, like sort of being able to respond to them. To get back to what you were saying about Matthew Broderick, one interpretation is that he's kind of meek, but I think the other interpretation is that he doesn't have the structure, I guess, so like one of the situations you're talking about, he's walking through a park to a school soccer game, and Anna Paquin and a friend are smoking a joint right in front of him, and he's like, come on guys, you shouldn't be doing that. But in a way, he doesn't have the structure really to like discipline them. I mean, they're not on school grounds, they're just like in Central Park or something. And
some of that,
yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, some of that made me feel like he doesn't actually care that much that they're smoking a joint. He just feels an like adult obligation to say something, but can't really push it all the way through. But
I thought it was sort of underlining the same thing with like the police station, where like she goes there, you know, expecting you did something wrong, you're going to get punished for it. But like, that's not really how we've decided we want the world to work anymore. Because, you know, what we mostly want is for, you know, I mean, that's the basis of our justice system is, you know, sort of innocent until proven guilty. And to sort of make admitting guilt something that's very difficult and punishing people. I don't want to get like too much into that, but anyway, so there's this whole idea of like what people are responsible for and how to hold them responsible and whatnot underlying, you know, even in all these different strands of the film and different things like how to hold them responsible. And just sort of my opinion on it is, I've always personally had problems with the idea of justice myself. It makes me really uncomfortable when people feel very just in their actions and how they think the world should work. And this movie captured a lot of my own personal uncomfortability with that, in that, you know, sort of over the course of the film, you kind of get, like, you know, her first decision is kind of, she thinks she's being just to lie, because she doesn't know this guy. The other woman's dead, you know. She doesn't know what's going to happen to him if she says that he ran the red light. So she thinks that she's being equitable to that guy. But then when she changes her mind and she wants to be equitable to this woman's memory, then she can't find any justice there. And then, of course, there are all these sort of background discussions about, in the wake of 9/11, and like terrorism, and, you know, who's responsible for what actions. The U.S. has been bombing the Middle East for years, and those people respond. Do their actions have any justice to them? Did ours ever have any justice to them? And I like, over the course of the film, that it's sort of like, at the end of the film, that's probably part of why I liked it, but I felt how I normally feel, which is that it's an extremely difficult subject to come to a definitive conclusion on, and that, you know, it sort of erodes those feelings over most of the film, where, you know, emotionally you understand really different viewpoints, like with when Jean Reno and Alice. What's Jean Reno's character's name? Does anyone remember?
His name is Ramon, I think.
Yeah.
Ramon. And,
Ramon and Alice are having an argument. Ramon is Anna Paquin's mother's boyfriend.
When you say Alice, who are you talking about?
Alice, I believe, is the name of the friend of the woman who died.
Oh, her name is Emily.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Emily?
Alice is the mom, right?
No, actually, the mom's name is Joan.
Oh, right.
Okay. So Joan is dating Ramon, and Joan, Ramon, and Anna Paquin's character is Lisa Cohen?
Yes, Lisa.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lisa? Okay. Lisa and Emily, who is the friend of the deceased, all go out to dinner, and they start arguing about Israel and Palestine. And Jean Reno makes what I think is the very correct point, that aggression from power is seen as protecting people, and aggression from minority is seen as terrorism. And then he turns out to be kind of anti-Semitic. And Emily's point is very emotional and not as rational as his, but also you can get behind it, and then like you just don't really know where to land. I've been talking a lot for a bit. I have a lot of thoughts about this film, but let's see if someone else wants to jump in there for a moment.
I was going to say one thing that I thought was really interesting. Patrick can talk because I feel like I've been talking a lot.
No. Go ahead, Basil. That's why all I said was go ahead, Basil.
Oh, okay.
I like to hear what you say.
Good listening. I was going to say one of the things that I thought was sort of interesting is, like, I felt like there was another theme that was kind of running throughout the thing, which is that Anna Paquin doesn't really understand how she feels after seeing what she's seen and experiencing that experience. And throughout the movie, she's like trying to have other people feel the same way she does about it, and that like this never happens is causing a lot of frustration for her. And one of the super interesting scenes where I felt like these two things kind of mixed together was when she meets up with the bus driver, and it feels like she's coming there in this hope that they're going to connect over this mutual experience that they had. Like she feels that in a way they both killed this woman, and they're going to share some kind of solidarity.
Hollywood moment.
Right. And they don't have that
embrace
because
and cry.
is very surprised that she comes and feels that she might be trying to blackmail him and is very misunderstanding of her intentions. And so he hides behind a lot of rhetoric that was informed probably by his lawyer to cover his own ass. And I don't think that he's being a jerk like she interprets for the rest of the movie. He's just like very confused about her intentions and
I think there's an undercurrent there that's only hinted at by Mark Ruffalo's acting in one of the scenes that sort of I was so like engrossed in the movie. That scene reminded me the reason that I was engrossed in the movie was how good the acting was, and I started paying attention to some of the things he's doing. So he keeps looking at his wife, live-in girlfriend, his significant other during that scene, like for her approval. He wants to know how she's going to respond, and I think maybe he's cheated on her in the past.
Yeah, I got that implication too.
And so, like, a young pretty girl comes into the house. He wants to make absolutely sure his wife thinks that he has not had an affair with her.
Right.
And I think that's like, it's one of those like sort of underneath subtle things about the movie. They don't have to explicitly state it. I think that that's his goal there. He doesn't want to be alone with her, you know, at first. Mm-hmm. He's like, no, my wife can stay so she can hear everything that you're saying. And right. he wants to make her, I don't think he's a jerk. I think he comes off to me as very much as protecting his relationship in that moment.
But I think it's interesting that her desire for like a new kind of justice and like being, as you said, equitable to Monica's memory is, I think, mostly, or at least very heavily influenced by the fact that she's frustrated that she wasn't able to share that experience that she wanted. It's not coming from like a really genuine feeling that Monica was wrong and was wronged and he has caused that wrong as so much as just like resentment for how he treated her in a weird moment.
I think her
Emily
I was gonna say her character basically spends the whole movie trying to have that moment where she can sort of release that emotion, because I mean, like directly after that she goes to the movies with that boy that asked her out, and she says that she just walked out because she didn't she says she didn't she didn't enjoy it, so she walked out. And then later she gets Kieran Culkin's character to come take her virginity.
Those are both earlier in the movie.
That's not before the bus accident, though.
No, not before the bus accident, but they're both before she goes to see Mark Ruffalo.
No, I know that, but that's what I'm saying. Like, those are also earlier attempts by her to have some sort of release of all that emotion that she's feeling about the accident. And it hasn't manifested itself totally at that point, but that's, now that you're saying that, I could see the reasoning behind her actions, because her actions in this movie sometimes just seem like, like, what are you doing? But when you look at it from that perspective where she's trying to have that release, like she's trying to have it with, Matt Damon, her teacher, or she's trying to have it maybe like in the classroom when they're having these big arguments. She's trying to release that emotion somewhere, and she can't do it until the very end of the film when she's at the opera with her mother, and she just starts crying, and not really a part that's a crying part of the opera. She just starts weeping uncontrollably, and that totally makes sense. That's something I had not put together until you said it, but yes.
I know it was after she went to see Mark Ruffalo's character, the bus driver. Does he have a name? I don't remember. They mostly call him the bus driver and the prick.
His name is Moretti is his name.
Okay. I don't remember them saying it, but so I like that. I think it's shortly after that, and this really underlines Basil's point, is shortly after that she's with Emily in Emily's apartment, and Emily totally calls her out on the fact that she's trying to like seek out this moment like of release or whatever, which she says that like for a moment that like her daughter's spirit inhabited her or something. Emily's like, oh, what, did she stay with you afterwards, or did she just come for like her death and then leave? And like she's really like sarcastic about it. And it's
I got that was a misinterpretation of what she was saying, though. Like, she wasn't saying that I don't think it was. I don't think she was saying that the daughter's spirit inhabited her. I think she was saying that in the eyes of the dying woman, she was her daughter permanent. That's what I thought. That's what she said.
That's what she said. Emily correctly interpreted it in my mind as she was trying to have this sort of perfect dramatic release moment. She wanted Emily to respond in a certain way to make her feel better, and Emily totally called her on it.
Yeah, she does call her on it. I agree with that.
I think it's I see what Patrick's saying, but I think it's like she's still like the reason that she uses the language that she does, I think, is that in a way Lisa's evoking like a hokey spirituality, even if she's not directly talking about it. So Emily's like, I don't know. She's more pragmatic.
I think Emily sort of in that scene gets to Kenneth Lonergan's feelings on the whole subject when she's like, get back to me when you're an adult, and this, you've experienced this enough that, every single thing doesn't have to be horrible when horribleness becomes banal to you, and then you'll see what kind of person you really are. I don't remember exactly the words that she used to say it, but I really love that moment. And then I think like right after that, it was her talking about how teenagers should run the world.
Oh yeah.
It was
I thought that was funny.
It was like right after that, and it was like, man, and
that was a good cut. Yeah.
One of the things that I like about this movie is that Lisa's really smart. Like she's like right about a lot of things she's right, but she's right in content but wrong in delivery, which makes her wrong. Like it doesn't matter that, like a good example of this is when she's like talking to the cop and she's getting frustrated, and he's like, we have certain rules about how we interrogate suspects now, and she's like, yeah, for white suspects. And like she's kind of right about that, and the different ways that police treat minorities when it comes to police work. We all know that that's true, but that's not
it's not something you should be saying to someone you're trying to get them to do something for you, and
without any basis that this guy himself has behaved in a racist manner.
You're basically generalizing.
He's been good to her.
Yeah, he's like trying to be nice by even reopening the possibility of continuing the case.
Yeah,
because he doesn't have to do that at all. He just feels bad.
I don't know. I wasn't sure that he was white either. Was he white?
He's kind of like a Italian
something. He was swarthy, I would say.
Yeah,
swarthy.
Yeah, if he was of European descent, it was definitely more towards the southern Italo-Greek Turkish region, I thought. Certainly not your standard Western European person that, I don't know, I would feel more comfortable saying something to. I don't know. And there were a lot of instances like that where it was like, yeah, she's right, but like her being right is kind of meaningless, I guess. Mm-hmm. Because she's not, I don't know, she was right in her words, but still not right. I don't know, something about that really deeply hit me. Like I really identified with being logically, technically right and still being wrong. Because I feel like I do that a lot.
I think there's a really interesting dynamic of that between her and her mother that plays out throughout the movie, where both of them are like have valid points in the argument but are so emotionally wrapped up in it that they end up like being really awful and mean to each other and spiteful in horrible ways. And it felt very much like, I mean, again,
like an actual family.
Yeah, like
where you can't have a discussion where people make valid points to each other without like an entire history of everything that's led up to this point, affecting it.
Yeah, there's a real interesting chemistry that, like, even though they look nothing alike, I could totally buy them as people who are related to each other and have spent a lot of time talking to each other.
So when I sort of convinced Dan Shank to watch You Can Count on Me, one of the things that he mentioned about it that I hadn't given the right words for, I guess this is something Dan does really well, is that he pointed out there's a small storyline in You Can Count on Me about there's a new boss, and he comes and he doesn't want Laura Linney's character Sammy to leave during the middle of the day to pick up her child from school, and it's sort of an important storyline in the movie. And Dan pointed out how these sort of invisible moments in real life usually don't get covered in films, that this is a real world problem that seems too small for most films to feel like they need to deal with it. And that sort of idea of, like, I guess invisible moments, I feel like is a really important part of this film, that even though the film is ostensibly about something very big, which is a wrongful death case and justice and how these things are handled, how some of the best scenes, in my opinion, are sort of about all the sort of smaller real world things and the way that it affects these bigger ideas. Like one of my favorite scenes is when she's on the phone with her dad, who was played by Kenneth Lonergan, by the way.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that.
That is Kenneth Lonergan plays the dad. It's funny, he in both movies he plays like patriarchs. He plays a priest, and You Can Count on Me, that Laura Linney turns to for advice. So she's on the phone with her dad, and her dad's new wife or girlfriend comes in, and she's not respecting that he's on the phone with his daughter, and he's trying to have like two conversations at once. And it's a very, like, how many times do you see that in film? You know, it's kind of like what Basil was getting at earlier. You know, that happens all the time, where you're doing one thing and someone wants your attention and they refuse to defer to the fact that you're already doing something. Like in most films, when that happens, when the other person walks in, they're like, I'm on the phone, and they're like, oh, okay, I'll come back in 1 minute and 28 seconds when you get off of the phone. And it's kind of like it's a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's made exactly the appropriately sized deal that it should be. She's trying to tell her dad about this awful thing that she's experienced, and that, you know, and that she lied. And he's trying to, you know, sort of deal with it in a way. He wants to protect her, so he's like, you should talk to my lawyer before you do anything. And his girlfriend seems to have these sort of minute concerns that maybe we shouldn't care about. She's like, what food do you want on this trip that we're going to take? Like, we need to order these lunches or something. Is there any food that you eat? But they're not really minute concerns. They're sort of the concerns of life. Making people happy, giving them the food that they want.
Yeah.
In some ways, there couldn't be a concern less minute than that. And they both, his wife, girlfriend, and his daughter both feel emotionally closed off in that scene because he can't give himself to everybody all of the time. It's a psychological... Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say... And it seems it's really interesting because I feel like it only seems that the wife is being very rude. She's being a little rude, but she's only being very rude because we know the circumstances of the conversation. But if they were just having a normal, like, hey, how are you? I'm doing okay conversation, It wouldn't seem that she's really doing anything that bad because she wants to get his attention while he has Anna Paquin on the phone. Like, hey, you have your daughter on the phone, ask her about food.
Yeah. No. It's the film, I think You Can Count on Me understands this as well, and it's why I'm really starting to think this guy is a great writer, is that it sort of uniquely understands the idea that there's no way to live in life without hurting other people. Like, you can't be alive and not do these things. And the film is all about how you, like, accommodate them. The fact that being alive is going to cause these sort of little psychological issues, in a way.
I found it really interesting that it dealt with something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, which was like people who die in accidents like that are just kind of, you know, pointless, stupid ways to die, kind of. But also at the same time, if your worldview is one that the life that you have is the only one that you have to live, and, you know, there's no afterlife or anything like that, like that being, you know, someone being killed in that way is really kind of the greatest tragedy that you could have. Like, it has no meaning, it has no, I guess, it leaves no closure for all the people around you. It's just sort of this random occurrence that is indicative of chaos, just like the chaos of the universe. And I like that, what's her name? Emily, the friend of the woman who dies, says that in her speech, where she says, I don't want to think about the senselessness of the way she died. I'd rather celebrate all the rest of the life that she had, because it's, you know, I guess she's coming from a place of, like, you know, trying to deal with it in a very grown-up way, like trying to deal with the fact that this just happened and she can't do anything about it. And so I like that the film actually addressed that. It's something I don't ever see addressed in films, I feel like. dealing with like, you know, just like senseless death like that.
See, well, I would disagree slightly there, because I would say that I feel like films more and more get pushed to the extremes. So, like, you either have, like, everything is a plan and it all works out and trust in the universe, and then on the other side you have everything is senseless, you know, there's nothing to do about anything. Like, you can find some popular films, I guess, that are just, like, grossly nihilistic.
Well, I'm not saying that there aren't films that are about the senselessness.
This film lands somewhere in between those two. And I guess my question for you is, you know, based on what you just said, what do you make of the ending and the fact that he gives her and the audience quite clear closure on this instance? You know, just, I mean, not closure in the sense of, like, you know, two people getting married in a romantic comedy, but still, like, that's what that scene at the end represents, doesn't it, for her?
Yeah, it's a catharsis. It's a, you know, she's finally gets to release all that.
What do you make of those two things being there together in the same film?
I was going to say what this film actually does is actually shows people dealing with the senselessness. Like, what I feel like other films don't show is the ramifications of senseless death. They just, you know, people die and it's nihilistic and it's crazy, and you know, some bad guy somewhere gets shot and he's dead and nobody cares about him. This is actually going back to, you know, the senseless death of a person, and actually shows, you know, how that affects the people around them and how that affects the people who witness it, and how it affects how it's not actually senseless. It's actually, you know, having a really big effect on the people who experienced it, and the people who experienced that person while they were alive.
Once you've clarified what you meant, I now agree with you 100%. Because, like,
on board.
Yeah, when you said that, like, other films don't deal with the senselessness, like, the first thing I thought of was maybe my least favorite example of it in film, which is the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, which is what most people sort of praise about the movie. But then to me it just feels like, in a way, tacked on to the beginning of the movie. There's no transition sort of from this, like, oh, war is so senseless, it's so violent, you can die so randomly, it's the worst thing in the world, to this supposed to be uplifting story of, like, sacrifice. It's just like those two things both exist in the film together, but they're not tied together. There's no movement from the senselessness, you know. It's just like, it is senseless. And, you know, it just feels like order is
now forced. I'm going to make you feel better about that.
Oh, yeah?
It's okay that... No. Like,
not you. You're talking, like, as Spielberg.
Here's a horrible thing, but now I'm going to make you feel a little better about it.
Yeah.
With a story that is very satisfying from a narrative perspective.
Yeah,
and your point is sort of, it's not about making us feel better. It's about us going through with her step by step, even steps that don't seem necessarily narratively important, but are emotionally important. We watch her go step for step, you know, over a several week process before, you know, she's not done. I don't think she's done at the end of the film, but she's knows what to do to be done, I guess.
Yeah.
With the process.
She's taken her first big step. I wanted to say on since you were talking about Saving Private Ryan, I guess sort of the counterpoint movie to Saving Private Ryan, The Thin Red Line, which I know, Reuben, the last time you saw it you didn't like, but there was a point in The Thin Red Line where Malick actually zooms in on, like, a dead Japanese soldier and has him... You know how everybody sort of reads poetry in their heads in Terrence Malick's movies. The soldier is reciting a poem, and you're actually hearing the words of the dead soldier talking about how all of these soldiers think that they are, you know, righteous and they're loved by all the people, you know, from wherever they're from. And it's basically the same way with him. He's coming from that same perspective. So I mean, it's I don't know. It was very interesting for me to see, like, just some random dead body. Like, you know, what's the story with this one person? Like, you know, who are all the people who loved that random dead person there, you know, laying on the ground? I thought that was really
I don't want to get into too much about, you know, like, too many other films. Apparently we're going to discuss all of the most important war movies in the last 15 years. But I think I feel like part of what I don't like about The Thin Red Line is that there's no hierarchy of importance. I mean, that there's no meaninglessness. Like, he made a war movie in which everything is extremely meaningful. Like, every moment is an unbelievable moment of meaningfulness, which to me feels like exactly the opposite of what war is. You know, Spielberg captures it appropriately in my mind, but doesn't have any idea how to deal with it. I'll say yet, because I think he's gotten a lot better with dealing with the serious issues since then. Malick doesn't capture it at all. Maybe he could deal with it, or maybe this is how he deals with it, but it's not very warlike. But
I think,
yeah.
Oh, as a way to tie this back in to each other, I think that one of the scenes that sticks out in my mind as being pretty successful, even though I haven't seen it in a long time, in The Thin Red Line, is Woody Harrelson's death. And since we brought them both up together, I think that Monica's death in this movie reminds me there are similarities in the way that they're handled, in that the scene is sort of like the person seems believably caught in disbelief at the fact that they're going to die, like, and that it has happened this way. Like, no one ever expects to be run over by a bus, and no one ever expects to accidentally sit on their own grenade in war. But that, like, the scene in Margaret was pretty amazing for the way that this, like, in some ways, certain parts of it felt ridiculous, and people didn't have any idea what they were doing, and it kind of came out of left field, because I feel like until that moment, I wasn't actually interested in the movie hardly at all. I was like, okay, here's Anna Paquin doing some stuff. And having watched the movie, I feel like that's almost intentional, that there's like a kind of sloppy banality to everything that happens before that.
And I mean, Allison Janney is kind of like a surprise. Like, I assumed she was going to live, because Allison Janney, fairly decent famous actress. Is, I mean, I think The West Wing was still on in 2005.
Yeah.
And I just assumed that the movie was going to be, she lives and they deal with the hardship of, her not having any legs anymore. But yeah, I was totally floored by that scene, by the fact that she died, how she died. I mean, it was gruesome. Like, obviously we see worse things in horror movies, but something about the way that he shoots it and the way that she's talking, it's very trying scene to watch, sort of all levels.
Yeah, and I thought the two guys that try and help her too, I thought they did a good job acting in that scene. Like, when they try and put a tourniquet on her legs or whatever, and like the blood sprays up on them, like you get like a realistic repulsion from them at what's actually happening. They're like, oh my god, like I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah, I think there's a moment where one of them, I don't know if he vocalizes it, where you can tell he's upset that the blood got on his suit, because like, and it's true, that would probably be your initial reaction if you were in a suit on your way to work. You just walk over to the scene not knowing what's going on, then you decide to help because that's your human instinct, is to help this person, and then it's
you get squirted with blood.
Blood sprays on your suit.
I really responded to that moment too, because the actor very quickly like goes through a whole bunch of different emotions that, I don't know, like, it seems impossible
when the blood sprays on him.
Yeah, like, because there is the repulsion, but then also just like, it could just be projecting, but like a little bit, like a moment also of like feeling sort of guilty about reacting so strongly right away. And then,
I think if your idea of a director as someone who sort of, gets the right actors for the roles and helps them get into the right emotions for each scene, Kenneth Lonergan is fantastic. I have complaints about You Can Count on Me, but none of them have anything to do with the acting of anybody, even people who have one line in the film. And it's the same with this movie. One of my favorite performances is this guy. I think he's in the background of some shots too, but he only has one little scene when she shows up and the cop that she was talking to isn't there.
That guy.
The asshole cop is there, who's a real asshole to her. And I love when he calls her honey or sweetie or something like that, and she's like, don't call me honey, please. And his entire demeanor changes. He's like, this fucking feminist piece of shit. And he does a really good job being an awful, awful person.
Yeah, he's in the background of a couple of scenes, just like talking about other cases or something that happened. Like, he's like, "Can you believe this fucking shit?" or something like that. Like, I can't believe they charged him with that or whatever. Like, yeah, I thought those scenes were kind of funny.
I mean, I don't know. Did you guys have any complaints about any performances by anyone in the film?
I initially had, from the very beginning, and part of it might have been the disconnect that you felt also, which is that in the beginning, Anna Paquin seemed distracting to me because, I mean, probably partly because she's in school, but it eventually made sense with her character. But in the beginning, like, I couldn't quite understand it because she seemed slightly more theatrical than the other actors, especially paired off against Matt Damon, who's doing a really good job of playing a very understated like character.
Matt Damon was great.
Yeah, I was like, hey, Matt Damon, why don't you do movies like this all the time instead of
the last
terrible
scene
political
between them,
parables?
when she like walks up to him and she's like, "So I got an abortion last week." Matt Damon was great in that scene. Like, I would give him an Oscar for just that scene.
And that scene's really interesting as another scene that doesn't have any exact narrative flow, but is sort of important emotionally as her like desperate last straws to like make people notice her and be in the same weird emotional boat with her. It doesn't
and
work
at that
again.
point, like, you don't even know if that's. I mean, we don't get to see it on film, so we don't know if that's true.
Yeah, but we do know that. Yeah, we do know that she had sex with Kieran Culkin's character earlier in the film, so it could be possible. Yeah, I thought about that too.
No, it's definitely, she had sex with Matt Damon too.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you also don't. Yeah, you don't know. It could be either of them, honestly,
or not.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm saying is that like at that. Like, you know, going back to like sort of Basil's original point about her whole character arc, which is sort of creating this moment. Like, at that point, it's believable that she's reached the idea that she still wants this to happen, that she's no longer even using reality to achieve it. She's using something that she completely conjured up to have this moment with somebody.
And I think in a way, if I'm interpreting her acting correctly, she sort of realizes what she's doing partway through the scene and like gives up on it, and then that kind of gives way for her very soon to have like the emotional realization of like coming to terms with what she's trying to do and starting to accept reality instead. Dense movie, you guys.
Yeah, which is, you know, just another thing that it's all acting and writing. They don't like she doesn't like stop like in the middle of doing it, being like, "I shouldn't have done this. I'm sorry. I'm going to walk away now." It's like, you know, it's a nice little build. And I think part of it has to do with how obviously Matt Damon handled the situation where she came over to his apartment and had sex with him very poorly. And then he handles that situation very well. And I think part of the reason why she changes is because he makes it very clear, I don't know how responsible he feels. Does that make any sense? Because she's saying, like, she's talking like she's asking for advice, even though she's obviously telling him. She's like, "Should I tell the father?"
Yeah.
She's like, "I'm not." She's like, "I'm not going to tell the father." And
he's like, "No, you should."
Assuming that she's telling the truth, he obviously could be the father, and he's like, "No, you have to tell the father."
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like he's saying, like, "I fucked up. Like, that's bad." I don't know. And his sort of calm, assertive energy, I don't know. It's another one of those things where, like, there's a character who does a good thing, makes a fair point, even though he's not really good himself.
Yeah, and that scene where she's, like, you know, coming on to him or whatever was another one of those scenes that made me, I was just like, oh. that was the, like, actually, that was the main offender. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to watch this. Like, why is this happening?
Yeah, it was upsetting to me, too, because I wanted him to be good. I mean, they had hinted at that before. There was like a shot like through, they were like talking in his classroom, and there was like a shot through like the door as like people were waiting, and he like had his hand on her leg or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, like from the very beginning. And then when it got to that point at the end, I was kind of, you know, I was just sort of like, come on, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it, Matt David. But then he did it.
Yeah, I thought that, there's also a shot in the weird scene where she borrows his bike to ride it. Like, that scene ends with a shot of Matt Damon looking at her, which I thought was like an interesting pretty not that on the nose way to end the scene while still hinting at a weird attraction that he's feeling, because there's lots of ways he could have.
They're not. So when he adjusts the bike seat, they're not showing the bike seat at all. It's just sort of like him going like this, and I was kind of like, oh, this is really weird, because it's just like the eye contact between them and like him like, you know, kind of doing like these weird movements like off camera. And I was like, it was kind of weirdly sexual. I probably made a bunch of noise.
Yeah.
That's fine. It'll highlight your point.
Mm-hmm.
I'll edit all of it out. I'll edit the whole podcast out.
But I think that this is an interesting like fact, because I think that a lot of people could call attention to the fact that Kenneth Lonergan's style is very subdued and in some ways like not very quote unquote cinematic, because
all of his style, or
well, like the visual style of the film, I should say, that it doesn't that it's a lot of static cameras and
I mean I would just, you know, I guess my exception to that would be like the extreme slow motion shots were very melodramatic and
right.
You know, arch, I guess. And one of my few complaints about the film.
Yeah, they do seem out of place compared to the others. But the point I think I was trying to make is maybe like a negative comparison, not of Lonergan, but like kind of the opposite, which is like Paul Thomas Anderson. I was reading a thing where like Matt Zoller was talking about a scene in Boogie Nights where during that big drug scene where there's like the kid throwing firecrackers on the ground and what's his name is like a crazy drug dealer, and Mark Wahlberg, there's like a push in on Mark Wahlberg's face that lasts a really long time, where it's supposed to be like the big emotional linchpin of the movie, where like Mark Wahlberg is like, oh, I'm way over my head, but Zoller was like, he should have realized that like 40 minutes earlier in the movie, like no person is this stupid to like take this long to realize how bad their life has become. And I guess like the reason I thought of the thing is that Paul Thomas Anderson is very much in favor of using the camera to like signify emotional and, you know, visual metaphor and things like that, like to cue the audience in. And I think that it's interesting that Lonergan usually lets the acting do most of the talking and ends up being much better for it.
I'm going to throw another big name out here, but I would say that, and I think you'll agree with me, is that Lonergan's has superficial simplicity, but underneath much more complex and deep. And I would compare him to someone like Ozu, actually. And that I think he does a lot with the camera. It's not moving. And with the lights, way more than he does in You Can Count on Me, which is still good, still well shot. But like I think one specific scene, the scene where she loses her virginity to Kieran Culkin's character, and like they're sort of like shadows, like on the bed, really visual. He has a lot of great close-ups in this movie of people's faces. And another shot that really stuck with me is the overhead one right before Lisa and her mom, Joan, are about to have their sort of emotional catharsis. And it was like, you get a really clear shot of their hairdos. I don't know. I love the way that this movie was shot, except for those. They almost worked, but they weren't like quite there, like the extreme slow motion scenes. At the credits, it seemed really out of place. He seems like one of those people who doesn't really see the point of opening credits and wishes that he didn't have to include it, and just it was like, here's some shots of New York City with these credits. I can't really blame him for that if that's his personal preference, but obviously that's how filmmaking in America works right now, is that you have to put all those names at the front so that all of those people get recognized.
Right. I think that it was interesting, like it almost made it work for me, but still not quite. I think he could have done it less. Apparently, is that there is one shot that seems like a similar shot much later in the film, but then you can pick out pretty clearly Anna Paquin's face in among the rest of the people all moving in slow motion. Like, and that tying it back to the beginning sort of, I mean, it didn't completely make it work, but it made it work for me.
I think it was the other way around. I think that he had that shot in there for whatever purpose. And then they were like, we need some opening credits. And he was like, no, I'll just shoot something like these other shots that I've already included in the film.
Right.
I mean, the one of those that really worked for me, sorry, I just want to finish the thing about the slow motion, is the one of them that really worked for me is when she was walking down the street and hassled by the young men, you know, who like were catcalling her and whatnot. You don't hear them catcalling her, but they're like clearly, you know, being sort of sexually aggressive, and she's like, stand down, and walks through them. Yeah. There was the slow motion of it made that scene like it really punched up the intensity of it.
I thought there was a scene between her and her mother kind of later. I think it's right after Jean Reno's character dies of a heart attack, where she goes in and tells her that she's got the tickets to go see the opera still from that Jean Reno's character gave her. And for some reason, the way that they shot that was interesting to me. Like they, instead of shooting it in a normal like shot reverse shot, they have Anna Paquin's character sitting facing her computer, and every time it's her line, they just have her turn like that, like look over her shoulder. For some reason, I really liked the way that she was kind of like, I don't know, doing this kind of like teenage thing where she's like kind of halfway paying attention to the conversation, but her mom's just like really earnestly invested in it. And I think
that's not when she tells her about it, right? That's after, when she's trying to get her to go to the opera.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It is after. That's what I said. It's after he has the heart attack. It's when she's.
But I was asking. It's not the scene where she tells her. That
yeah, I know that. That's.
No, I'm asking.
No, it's not
telling.
It's not the scene where she tells her. It's not the scene where she tells her about the heart attack. It's the scene where she has the tickets to the opera, and she's like, "Do you want to go to the opera with me?"
Okay.
It's that scene.
And Anna Paquin very casually is like, sure.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, I'll go.
She's become, at that moment, she's become sort of superficially agreeable without sort of actually, you know, in body language and emotion, actually investing herself in the exchange.
But I like the way that they shot that, because I don't think you normally see like a character just like, you see the back of their head and then just turn around like that, like look back, like yeah, like conversation like that, where the other character's like, you know, face forward, very earnest. For some reason that stuck out to me, and I liked the way that they shot that. It looked a little more cinematic than just, you know, shot reverse shot.
Speaking of Jean Reno, I wanted to point out this is apparently a continuing thing in Kenneth Lonergan's films based on the two I've seen. I doubt it's in Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, but maybe it is. He includes sort of a guy with a boring job. Like, everyone has seen this before. Like, someone did like a count or something like of rom-coms of like the last 10 years or something, and something like 65% of men in rom-coms are architects. Even though something like 0.3% of the actual population is architects. And then they're always doing really well, even though apparently architecture is actually, like, architects are doing really poorly right now, which is not that surprising. There's not that much building going on since the real estate bust. My kind of point is that when she goes on the date, he's kind of boring, right? He's like a boring guy, and she decides to sleep with him anyway. And the film is sort of okay with that. And there's something that I really like about that. It's going on, and You Can Count on Me Too. She's kind of drawn, like she's deciding between two different men in her life, and You Can Count on Me. And Laura Linney at one point says, you know, sort of stating outright the reason that she's with them is because she feels sorry for them. And there's something that I like about that.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of interesting dynamics going on with their relationship that are mostly unstated, like that he is sort of boring, but she's interested in the fact that he's interested in her because she is an actress, and like the fact that he's a weird huge fan of her work is very flattering, and also just like the idea that it makes a very small point, but a real point, that like dating can be very hard for women over a certain age because
with two children,
right,
alone in New York,
there aren't a lot of options for them, and socially it's much more acceptable for men to date younger women than the other way around, so it limits the dating pool considerably.
It's another one of those sort of invisible problems that Kenneth Lonergan is interested enough to bring to the forefront.
Without even really discussing it, which is cool.
Yeah.
Like other movies might make that like the whole story of a movie, but in this it's
or
like
they would
not
make
even
the story
actually brought...
her going on a bunch of boring dates until she finds the right guy.
Right.
And in this movie, it's like, he's good enough. Like, she only breaks up with him because he's totally racist. Like, she doesn't break up with him because he's boring or because he has, like, opposite interests of her. Like, that's not a problem. That's not a real-world problem. Like,
I thought
being lonely is a real world problem.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, a guy being super anti-Semitic is a real world problem. I mean, he's only slightly anti-Semitic. I don't want to say super.
I was going to say, though, I found it interesting that he's so, like, cultured and goes to the opera and knows the proper terms for saying bravo for the actors and the singers in the opera and stuff, but he still has this, like, weird kind of racist bent to his arguments when he's, having that discussion. It's just like... Where
is he supposed to be from?
I wanted to say he was from, like, South America somewhere, something like that.
Yeah, that's where he works.
I think so. I thought that's where he was from, though.
Yeah, I think there's a very small passage early on in the film where he says that his parents were from somewhere in Europe and they moved to Panama, and he was born in Panama, but then came back and studied in France. And so he has like kind of this amalgamated accent, and then and that now he works in South America, like redeveloping software so that it's compatible with the rest of the world's software.
Literally the most boring job in the world. And even in that little detail of his boring job, you sort of get to some of the major themes of the film, which is the idea of all these different peoples being able to communicate with each other and like come to a singular idea of what the right thing is to do.
And I thought it was interesting because I think that there's still like I feel like I agree like probably like 90% of the way, but there is an interesting moment when he's making his argument with Joan about breaking up that like he used the wrong word, and there's like an interesting kind of like, it's not completely plausible, but it almost could be plausible because of the fact that English is like not his first language, that he's like it's possible that he's not really anti-Semitic and just in the moment said Jewish when he meant to say Israeli, but
he's just
probably
he's just using he's using the fact that he doesn't know English maybe to cover the fact that he said something racist.
Or the other way around.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't speak English.
He didn't know the proper word,
I mean, as you both know, I'm Jewish, and I didn't hate him. I wanted to sit down with him. Like, you make some good points. He was kind of like Lisa in that scene. He was right, but he was wrong at the same time that he was right.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around in this movie where people just use the wrong word, like they just use the wrong adjective sometimes. So there's just like, or what she calls Emily?
Strident?
Strident. She calls her strident. She's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use that word. You're right, I used it incorrectly.
Like, go home and get a dictionary and look it up.
Yeah, that's a big part of that argument, is like her apologizing for using the word strident.
I think it's a big part of the argument because Lisa feels like if they can get past that they can get back to an okay place. She's sort of obsessing on that word. Also because she doesn't want to apologize for the fact, I think, that of what she was actually doing yet at that point.
It was funny. That made me look up the word strident, and it seemed not as bad as Emily took it either. Like, it seemed like an easy word to misuse in that moment. So
I'm going to look it up myself now because I feel like I know the definition, but I want to make sure. I don't want to make Emily mad. I like her.
She's a fun character. I like when she yells at the lawyer because he's using too much lawyer speak.
Oh, That scene was so good. The way... This is going to make me sound kind of racist, anti-Semitic, but I knew that she was Jewish before they ever told us. Because of how she handles scenes like that. Like, that is how a lot of people in my family will act. They're, on the Jewish side of my family. They will just stop you. They're like, I don't want to hear this. Stop. I have no interest in any of these things that you are saying. Tell me the thing that I need to hear so that I can go on with my day.
She just totally like steamrolls his feelings. Like, the actor does a really good job of being like really hurt because...
Yeah, he's all excited about his lawyer knowledge. And I got to tell you, it's probably of any movie with any scenes involving law or lawyers or how courts work, my favorite. I mean, I hate court scenes, and I usually hate law scenes. And I was like listening to him, and I was like, damn, law sounds interesting. Like, listen to all these things that he knows. And it was the same with the other guy when he was like explaining to her, he's like, this is the way law works now. He's like, people settle. You don't go to court.
Yeah, I thought that was another like interesting, realistic touch. That's the way a lawyer would really talk to somebody who didn't know what the law is. Like, they'll break it down for them probably because they're working for them. So they're like, this is what we got to do. Like, this is the way the law is going to work in your favor. You've just got to, play it the right way. And so I thought it was cool that the way they broke it down like a real lawyer would. Like, I feel like you don't see that in movies ever. Like lawyers, like, the screenwriters want to sound impressive, like they know some law, so they just like throw a bunch of lawyer terms at them. The characters magically understand what all that means.
And speaking of the lawyers and the settlement and whatnot, her cousin, I don't know if I've ever hated a character that much who's in that little amount of a film. Just like every second, like they cut to her and she's sitting there, right? And we hadn't seen her before and she's not speaking. And I'm like, that's that cousin, isn't it? That's that cousin that I hate. She's just sitting there and I'm like, I hate her. And when she started telling Lisa, she's like, we're being so nice to include you. In this, and like we're just trying to do what's right and honor her memory. And I'm like, you are complete bullshit. Like,
yeah,
everything about you is the worst.
Her memory.
You were screaming. You were screaming at Lisa for calling you.
Yeah,
like how many calls could she have gotten about some random woman getting run over? It's not like she was a celebrity. Like maybe 5.
Yeah. And she says it's harassment, too.
Maybe like 20 minutes out of her entire life has been taken up by this.
Yeah.
And all she had to do when like the person started asking questions, she could have just been like, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to do with this. You need to call the executor of the state. That's like all she needed to say. They were perfectly drawn characters, and the way that they presented themselves as the victims of the situation that they didn't initiate, where they were coming away with $350,000. So they had nothing to do with getting that money for themselves. They had no relationship with her except for blood.
And I also,
they didn't start the court case, and yet somehow they thought they were the victims.
Yeah. I also thought it was a nice touch, like cherry on top of those characters when he tells them like the terms of the settlement, like how much they're going to get, and they like have a little like whispering conference, and then they just go sold like together like that. It's like you sold, you fucking assholes. This, like somebody has died, and you're like, we want to buy that house. It's
it's like a game show.
I know. It's like the
deal or no deal. 350,000. Deal.
It makes me wonder if I might behave the same way, though, if some family member that I barely knew and didn't care about died, and then I was going to get a bunch of money because of it. I'd be like, all right, give me that money.
I mean, yeah, I would do that, but I wouldn't be like, I would be like, well, thank you to this person.
Yeah, I might show a little more tact, but...
Yeah, I would be like, what were your reasons for bringing this up? Because I'm going to get some money out of this, so I think you should get something too for starting it. Like, they just completely ignore her.
Oh, so we haven't talked about my favorite scene yet, although it's my favorite scene because I really wasn't exactly sure to make of it. But so there's a scene in the movie, maybe about 3/4 of the way through, maybe a little bit further, where they're discussing Shakespeare. And this one guy, maybe like kooky religious, maybe there's like some backstory there that we don't get access to, like turns this quote, which is, you know, I agree with Matthew Broderick's character that it's pretty obviously about one thing, and he keeps trying to argue in class that, you know, trying to turn it to what he wants to say, and then Matthew Broderick, the teacher, just gets fed up. He's like, that's not what Shakespeare is saying, and I want to move past this because you are incorrect. So what do you guys make of that
bite of a sandwich?
He's drinking orange juice, and he keeps like... He was like, anxiety drinking orange juice. He's like, oh, these kids, orange juice.
But like he punctuates the very end of the scene when he says he wants to move on by picking up what looks like a tuna sandwich and taking a bite of it. And I'm like, why is this teacher eating and drinking during class?
He didn't have time for lunch. He's gotta have his tuna sandwich. I liked that kid was making that argument because being formerly religious, like I knew exactly where that kid's head was coming from. Like I knew exactly where that argument was coming from. I was like, I know exactly the dogma that forms that kind of an argument, and I understood his argument completely. And the fact that he kept just repeating the same things over and over again, like making the same exact argument, it was like you don't have any depth to your argument. You're just like making it to be kind of contrarian and.
Neither of them did, actually. Like they're in high school, but I had a sort of instance, not exactly like that, but in college, where someone was like, someone sort of said like, aren't we just making this all up? Like, aren't we just saying like, what we think the writer said, but none of us know. How do you know any of this was intentional? And then the teacher like pulled out a bunch of books and like scholarly articles, and it just went like point by point, and he's like, here is a thing that is obviously a reference to this thing, and he's like, here is another thing. It's like, these writers are not just writing randomly. It's like and he sort of went point by point, and Matthew Broderick was just sort of like, no, you're wrong, and I agree, he is wrong, but he didn't handle it.
It was another
he didn't like be like, no, this is why you're wrong, blah 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 blah. He was just like, he was clearly sick of this kid before he even opened his mouth. Yeah, he was like, I'm so tired of dealing with this crazy kid who brings everything back to God.
It was another instance of somebody like being logically right but saying the wrong thing, so they're wrong. Like they just looked like they were wrong. It's almost like a political wrongness.
Yeah. In a way, that kid almost wins that. In a way, like wins that argument in a traditional movie sense, like because he just remains level-headed and like is like, but what about this idea? I'm just bringing this up.
Lisa
and
even seems kind of drawn to him.
Right.
Like as he keeps repeating his point, she keeps looking at him like more and more. She's like interested. She's like, this is an interesting point.
She's like, I kind of want to fuck your idea.
But she can't, because that idea is a virgin until marriage.
Also, I feel like it's interesting because, I mean, it's weird. Like, it's an idea that even if it was valid, like, you can't accept it because then you just have nowhere to go. Just be like, all right, well, if that's the case, then discussion over. No more teaching, no more class.
I got in that exact argument with a Christian person once, and like they didn't have any response, so they kept repeating the wrong response over and over again. I was like, so how do you think? I was like, how were you? You used to not be a Christian. I was like, how were you converted? And he was like, well, the Holy Spirit, came to me and changed me. And I was like, so there has to be something. And I was like, is there any way that you can cause that to happen in another person? Or is it just, sort of like a divine thing that happens? He's like, no, it's divine. It's beyond human understanding. And I'm like, so why are you arguing with me about this? Like, why are you trying to convince me of a thing that you literally have no control over? And he was like, well, if you look at the Bible. And I was like, no. You can't jump back to something else. I was like, answer this one point. If that is how conversion works, why are you trying to convert anybody? the spirit is going to come and accept it, or it's not. And he kept trying to go back to earlier points, and I was like, nope. Like you were saying, like, if what are we doing even thinking about God if like it's beyond our understanding?
Yeah. So.
And in that particular comparison, I think flies actually have a very good understanding of little boys. Which is to run from them.
Yeah, get away. Yes. Everyone should get away from little boys. The most destructive force in the universe is young males. Do we have anything else to say about this? We got a very long discussion out of this one.
Yeah, well,
I liked it.
Our longest movie yet, also. So there's that too.
Makes sense. I like that Kieran Culkin did not appear again after the sex scene.
He was just like, yeah, that's what I'm here for.
But that there wasn't like the usual scene where she tries to call him and he's like avoiding her or something like that.
Yeah.
Because she told him that she loved him.
I also kind of found it interesting that she basically like there is no sort of ramification for her like having sex with her teacher, and at the end of that scene she's like fucking don't worry about it, it's just sex. It's like, that's such a weird thing to add to the end of a scene where like a student has just had sex with a teacher. It's like this really wrong thing, but the student's being like really flippant about it, just being like, whatever.
Well, I think that's how she feels about the world right then. Do you know what I mean? Like that you do bad things and then nothing happens to you, right? I mean, that's how she feels.
Yeah,
right.
I guess so.
And also in a teenage way of like being like, well, the first time I had sex, I was really nervous and it made it awkward. So maybe this time I should try and do what Kieran Culkin was doing, which was being super cash about it.
Yeah, that too. I'll just say that we already hit on two of the things that I didn't work for me in the movie. One was the slow motion shots at certain points, and the other was that, even though she ended up over the course of the film, I was really glad with Anna Paquin, when maybe they should have just cast older extras too, but in those first couple of classroom scenes, Anna Paquin and McLovin is in a scene too. I think some other decently famous actor who I recognized and was also in his early 20s. Both looked really weird with the extras who seemed a lot more age appropriate. And then my third complaint was the dream sequence with like the blood on her hands.
Oh yeah.
I forgot all about that.
I forgot about that scene too.
So I, like my sort of explanation for it in my head is that that's the kind of dream sequence that she would have because she's really arch and like obvious in her metaphor, like as a person, and it's a dream from her perspective. But it still seemed like kind of a stretch, and I was like, well, you didn't really need to include this. Yeah. It was like to give Allison Annie like another, 35 seconds of screen time or something. Those are pretty much my only complaints.
Maybe I need to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable with movies.
You can do what you want. And
I'm just saying, like every time I'm a little bit uncomfortable with a movie, I start like pulling away from it immediately, and I'm like, But then when I go back and talk about it with you guys, I'm like, this movie makes so much, like there's so many good points and so much sense to be made out of this movie. Like it espouses really good, worldviews and like ways of dissecting things. I'm like, why am I so uncomfortable with, just like little like shallow bullshit? Like, I'm a little bit uncomfortable in this scene. I don't want any discomfort to befall me in my film watching. Like, I think
up to you to just.
Yeah, I think it's just me being lazy with movie watching. Honestly,
okay,
I'm just being lazy.
I mean, I don't know if Basil's the same way, but I've always liked uncomfortable movies. Like, a movie that is extremely comfortable normally makes me uncomfortable. It's just, how I've always been. It hasn't been like a changing thing for me where I was like, oh, I don't buy into like Hollywood's narrative bullshit or anything anymore. It was kind of like I was pretty much always that way. Like as a kid, I wanted to be surprised and like for things to come out of left field, and it's become, more nuanced. It used to be like I liked trick endings a lot and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't think you should force yourself to do anything. If you're going to like uncomfortable movies more in the future, you're just going to like them because it happens.
I was going to say, it's not necessarily forcing myself. It's more about like taking actual, like putting in the effort to actually consider what I've just watched. Like, I feel like I get halfway through a movie and I'm already like judging it in my head. And I need to like watch the whole thing and then consider it all together. Like, I need to take more time to do that, because I
think that's great if you do that, but I don't do that.
A lot of the times I make snap judgments and I'm like, it's over.
I usually know within the first maybe 10 seconds whether or not a movie even has a possibility of me liking it. I mean, that opinion expands or contracts over the course of the whole film, but I would say the first shot is enough for me to determine whether or not I dislike a film.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm not any better, considering I have an entire blog devoted to judging movies solely based on their first 5 minutes.
That's funny.
See, I'm even less. Like, literally the first shot of a film, the very first shot of a film, once it has been completed, I don't know whether or not I will like it or love it or one of its the best films ever, but if it's in the dislike category, I know.
I feel like if I had done that,
it very rarely changes.
I'm assuming you're not counting the opening credits as the first shot then, in this case. Because based on that first shot, I was like, what is this movie?
Yeah, I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that they were competent with the camera. Like, I knew that much, and that to me was enough to be interested enough to keep watching.
I consider the only film in which the first shot of the movie really was memorable for me was Return of the Living Dead, in which the first frame is just a block of text that says everything in this movie is real and all of the characters are real people. It's like, that's awesome. That's the only time I've ever seen that in a movie, and I loved it.
I don't want to say that, first shots are like so important to me that I like remember them for a long time afterwards, because I don't once I've finished watching the film. It's just sort of like I get very quick impressions. I do it with people too. Within 2 or 3 seconds of meeting someone, I've already formed a impression of them based on, I don't know, I have some sort of pattern recognition or whatever going on in my brain, and I'm like, this person did something that slightly reminds me of someone who I hate. So now I hate them too. I do that, I don't think it's fair that I do that with people, but I'm sort of okay with it, doing it with movies, because I think it is fair. I think it's based on a real thing. I have been wrong, but it's, a very small percentage of the time. And considering usually once I start watching a movie, I finish it. I find out if I'm wrong. Probably if I start off disliking a movie, it takes me longer to come around because I'm more focused on the things that I don't like to begin with. And so I notice them, and the good things have to work even harder to grab my attention. I would say that was probably true of Hunger Games. Not that I hated the first shot, but that I went into it thinking that I would have a bad opinion of it. And, it took a really long time for me to sort of be into the movie. And then when I finished watching it, I was like, I kind of like that. So then I rewatched it with the opinion of kind of liking it. And then I liked it a lot more the second time.
Yeah. For
some the original reason, Hunger Games.
Yeah, I was going to say, for some reason with that one, I just one day I just got the itch. I was just like, I really want to watch this. It was like one day I was like, I really want to watch all the Avengers movies for some reason today. And so I went and did it. I didn't like all of them, but I was just like, sometimes I'll just get an itch. I'll be like, I kind of want to check out this, cultural phenomenon that everybody's going on about. Usually I'm not into it when everybody else is like, wow, it's the best thing. I'm like, I'll probably get interested in it later.
I do a different thing, which is go into it expecting it to be terrible, but see it anyway, so that I can tell people that I think it's terrible and they tell me how great it is.
I do that sometimes. I did that with The Wrestler, actually. I watched The Wrestler while I was out here, and I was like, yep, it's awful and depressing, just like I thought it would be. Thanks a lot, Darren Aronofsky.
Now you're ready to see his Bible movie.
I almost, but never actually did, do that with Paul Haggis's Crash. But when people were talking about it, I was like, I really watched this just so I can specifically tell people, because I knew it was terrible. There was no doubt in my mind that it was terrible, but I never saw it, so I was like, I should see it just so that I can be like, yeah, it's really terrible. That's the strongest I've ever had that inclination.
Do we have anything else to say about You Can Count on Me?
Probably, but we were talking about Margaret.
Yeah, sorry. One of those Kenneth Lonergan movies. I'm looking at IMDb right now, so
we should do Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle next.
Yeah.
So I'll say this: it's just a completely made-up feeling that I had, but I feel like Kenneth Lonergan doesn't really like opera, but he wants to like opera, and that he made it an important part of this movie as part of his own, like, sort of becoming a bigger, better person. Like, there was something really convincing about the way that, you know, Anna Paquin and Joan talk about not liking the opera that made me sort of think he doesn't really like the opera. Because he was, like, very convincing at the beginning of the movie, them talking about why they didn't like it. And he doesn't really give any screen time. And when he does, he's not very convincing. When Jean Reno's character says why he does like the opera. And then they end with the shots of, like, the women, like, singing at each other. I was like, damn, like, this opera is good. And, like, there's something about that thing that I completely invented that I really like about Kenneth Lonergan. Like, the idea that he would be like, I don't like opera, so I want to make opera the thing that brings them together because I don't like it. Like, it's important to me to care about the things that I don't like. Yeah. I really like the way I just said that. It's important to me to care about the things that I don't like. So I'm going to repeat it.
Sounds like a good place to end.
I also have, I guess, kind of a correction. Kenneth Lonergan wrote The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, or he contributed to the screenplay. I'm not sure what his full involvement was. He didn't direct it. Somebody named Des McAnuff did.
I thought he directed it.
Yeah, it's
in
his writing.
Maybe he disavowed credit.
It's possible. His writing credits are listed first on his IMDb page, so that may be the confusion there.
No, I read it. I mean, this information comes from an interview that I read from him that I read a long, long time ago, and so I could certainly have remembered it incorrectly.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, because when I was looking at his IMDb page, I saw Rocky Bullwinkle, and I was like, okay, and then I realized that was his writer's column, and then the director column, you had to scroll down further. And
I just remember that it was his first appearance in Hollywood, and that he didn't like it, from this interview that I read. And I remember that. The two things I remember from the interview is that, and that the other thing from the interview I remember is that, so everyone, like the producers are like people so You Can Count on Me, I guess, was his first directing thing, and it was his first film where he was like, really at the helm. And he just shot the scenes as he had written them. Like, he didn't change anything on set, and everyone was like, "You're doing this wrong." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "You're supposed to change things to shoot it." And he's like, "No, I wrote it down the way that I liked it." He's like, I wrote the words that I wanted the people to use. And they're like, no, that's not how you're supposed to do it. Because he's a writer first. And he's like, no, I wrote it the way that I like it. They're all like, no, that's not what directors do. Directors change everything once you get to the set. And he didn't change anything. Like, literally, if you read the script for You Can Count on Me, it is the exact movie. Not just the words, but like even like the settings for the scenes. Like you can tell everything is just shot exactly how he wrote it down. He knew exactly how he wanted it to look. And everyone's like, no, that's not how you do it. Those are the two things that I remember about that interview, Rocky and Bullwinkle, and that Kenneth Lonergan apparently didn't know how to direct because he actually knew what he wanted before he got down was in the room directing.
Because directing is not knowing what you want.
Or knowing that you don't want what the writer wants. But in this case, he was both writer and director, so he didn't have to argue with himself.
Apparently, Des McAnuff is a real person because there's a picture of him here, and he was a producer on The Iron Giant. Interestingly enough,
that's cool.
I looked at his thing, and he also didn't direct a movie for 9 years after Rocky and Bullwinkle. So apparently, You Can Count on Me and Rocky and Bullwinkle cause a lot of trouble with directors getting another project off the ground.
I remember correctly, he wanted to go back to doing plays. I think he's done a bunch of plays in that intervening time, because he's a playwright first. In fact, Margaret might even have been a play first. I'm not sure.
It's possible. He was also the writer for Gangs of New York, realize, and Analyze.
I think Margaret was... I'm sorry, what was the second one?
Analyze This.
I think Margaret was a play first.
Yeah, that makes sense. He was also a writer for the TV series Doug, which big ups to him for that. That makes sense why I like that so much. It had some quality behind it, that series.
And this is my last thing I'll say, is that so the main actor in the play within the play within the movie, the other main actor besides Joan, is the guy from Kicking and Screaming, also House of Yes. Do you guys know him? I think his name is Grodin.
I'm not familiar with. I haven't seen either of those movies. Actually, I was gonna say the only Noah Baumbach movie I've seen is
some Whit Stillman movies, I think, too.
The only Noah Baumbach movie I've seen is Frances Ha, which I watched while I was out here too, which I really liked.
But yeah,
we should do that movie.
And then he was great.
We should do Frances Ha
in it. I really liked him, and that's it. That's all of my thoughts on this movie.
That's it.
I was really glad to see him, and I thought he was great in the 2 minutes that he was.
Oh yeah,
in it.
I wanted to shout out Olivia Thirlby in this movie, the girl who played Anderson in Dread. She's awesome. I just really like her. She's one of the students. I can't remember her character's name. No, she's one of the girls that's arguing.
Oh, is she the one that keeps yelling? Or
she's not the Syrian girl.
Right, but she's the one that says, "Hey, we should apologize for being a jerk to this girl just for stating her opinion."
Yeah, I believe that's her. Yes.
Is that the same one who in the second scene was like, "Can somebody else talk besides these two?"
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
She was great. All of them were great, and everybody was great. It's really weird. I never see everyone is great, and I found there's always someone who I'm like, I could have done without them. What was that movie that? Do you remember that movie that we were talking about, Basil, where I was like, I didn't like the extras, which was a complaint that I had never had before? Do you remember what movie that was?
No, I can't.
Oh, it was The Counselor. Like, that's how I was with that movie. I was like,
oh my god.
I was like, the extras are really weird and bad. Just cut out talking about The Counselor.
I'll just make a separate clip, a separate shorter clip. Let's just put that
Oh my god, you know what you should do? You should be like, we did a podcast on The Counselor, and it's just me saying it was terrible. It's just for 2 seconds. It was terrible.
and then record like 60 minutes of dead air just to make it seem like it's an actual full-length podcast.
I should record my. It's like my review of Olympus Has Fallen. Fuck this movie.
Okay.
I watched
Sorry.
I watched the beginning of. Wow, this is not related at all. But I watched the beginning of White House Down and the beginning of Olympus Has Fallen, and based on the first 5 minutes, Olympus Has Fallen is much better. But
really?
I can't say based on anything else, but
wait till you get
I
to
don't
the part
remember
where
the first 5 minutes of White House Down, so I'm willing to believe it.
Wait till they get to the part where they burn the American flag and throw it off the roof of the White House.
Okay, so any final thoughts on Margaret from anybody?
I think we're good. I feel happy about this podcasting.
Yeah. If we hadn't had this podcast, I would have felt the need to write about it, and I'm glad that I'm not going to write about it, because it's really hard for me to write about movies that I have sort of this much going on in my head to say about it. I just get frustrated. Right. Okay.
Structure.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.